The dream machine, DICOM, HL7, IHE in the stack. We're building the future, never looking back.
Welcome to Imaging Informatics Unplugged, and with all the buzz around machine learning in medical imaging, training these models is crucial. But here's the big question: how do we feed AI real-life data without exposing all that precious, protected health information? Because let's be real, without proper de-identification, your medical images could feel about as exposed as George Costanza stepping out of cold water, unexpected, embarrassing, and impossible to explain after the fact. In today's episode, we sit down with Luke Bideaux from Vega Informatics to break down how to protect PHI while giving the ML models real-world data. Luke Bideaux is the president and CEO of Vega Imaging Informatics. He's held leadership roles at multiple imaging vendors and provider-based organizations across the United States, focusing on imaging informatics, interoperability, and data privacy. Luke is a published author and a recognized advocate in the field of imaging informatics, regularly contributing to industry discussions and conferences. He completed his radiography training at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, earning a Bachelor of Science in Radiologic Technology. Additionally, he holds professional certifications from the American Registry of Radiologic Technologists and the American Board of Imaging Informatics. So the question: how do we balance innovation with privacy? Let's jump into it. Thank you very much, Luke, for being here today. And we're going to talk a lot about de-identification and data models and training data models. Before we jump into the main course, maybe to have a couple appetizers here and set the stage. What does Vega Informatics, can you just describe a little bit about your core services when it comes to what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. So Vega Imaging Informatics is a leading provider of imaging informatics services and solutions. We sort of break down our company into three different divisions. So we have Vega Data, which is sort of our primary division. We provide de-identified medical imaging data to many of the AI developers in the medical imaging space around the world. So we have over 400, actually over 600 imaging facility partners now, and we keep growing that number every year that we source data from, and we work with AI developers from many different countries to help them train the models that they're building and test their models to achieve regulatory clearances and so forth. So it's a very exciting space, and it's a growing area. And then we have our Vega Pro division. This is our professional services division. We provide managed services in the imaging informatics space. So any organizations that are in need of some more help, from PACS administration services, project management for putting in a new PACS or migrating data from one PACS to another, things like that. And then we have our Vega Tech division, which specializes in medical imaging AI solutions. So some really exciting solutions that are geared towards leveraging AI to improve workflow efficiencies and just make a positive impact in the medical imaging space.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you for setting the stage. And let's go back to that first area where you were talking about assisting with training models, and you're curating information. And you had mentioned that there's a de-identification process that's involved. So maybe to start out, we can ask, why is de-identification? Why is this important? And let's just look at it from a broad perspective, not imaging, but just all data sets when we're training models. Why is de-identification necessary?
Right. So first of all, I could speak first and foremost for the U.S. laws. There are some laws pertaining to the secondary use of medical records. So whenever you have some sort of initiative that plans to use the medical records for secondary purposes, not for clinical care, direct clinical care, um, you either need to attain patient's consent to use the medical records for research purposes or development or whatever your secondary use is. And that's pretty common to see in clinical trials where you're attaining patient consent to use that data for research purposes. And then the other option is to do de-identification, and there are some methods that have been approved in the U.S. by the Department of Health and Human Services for de-identifying medical records. And those would be the expert determination method and the safe harbor method. And medical imaging studies are considered medical records, just like any other kind of EMR records or things outside of the imaging space. And so we must follow the same laws that any other medical specialty would have to follow as it pertains to de-identifying the records. The trouble is that medical imaging records, in my opinion, are far more complicated to de-identify than many other specialties. And that's kind of where Vega comes in, because we have the expertise in imaging informatics and we have the world's leading tool set to perform de-identification at scale. And so we've spent like over the last 6 years kind of optimizing those processes and those tools to do things at larger and larger scales. But most importantly, we have the expertise to validate that the de-identification that we think we're using is actually being done successfully. And that's definitely an area that I see in the industry is lacking. And so I do worry about, some of the de-identification that's happening in the medical imaging space. Without the proper expertise and tool sets, I think a lot of mistakes can be made unknowingly, maybe with organizations have the best intentions, but they are making mistakes, and it could lead to some pretty significant consequences. And so, we work with these organizations that don't have the in-house expertise and tools and so forth, but they do have data that's of value and really can make a major impact on the advancement of AI for medical imaging. And so we're kind of the glue that pulls together that valuable data that the organizations have and the AI developers that need it, and take care of the process kind of from end to end.
So let's zero in on the imaging side for a few moments. And we think of the image, it goes inside of a container, the DICOM container. So we know that there's a header and there's metadata. So that information is going to have to get looked at when we look at de-identifying. So I'm curious the challenges there. And then we also have the opportunity where information could be embedded within the pixel information itself. And we have to figure out ways to de-identify that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are in these areas and these types of challenges that you're faced with.
Yeah, so we can start with the metadata side of the DICOM image. It's certainly a challenge. For one thing, there's so many DICOM tags. To write a script that would address all possible DICOM tags, which, by the way, is an approach that I see others trying to do, have like one master script that's supposed to address everything. It seems impossible to me. There's so many tags, and then the adherence to the DICOM standard can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, or even from model to model within a given manufacturer. And there's so many tags to deal with. First of all, just to determine, okay, well, which tags could possibly contain PHI? Well, under the assumption that the manufacturer is abiding by the DICOM standard, and populating those tags as we would expect. I mean, that in itself is a major challenge. The DICOM standard is always changing. There's new things coming out. You got to stay on top of it.
Or even operationally, someone might map it to another area. All of a sudden you
Well,
have.
absolutely. There are certainly times when either at the organizational level or the device manufacturer level, they're not abiding by the standard, and so you have to look out for that. But even just simply trying to come up with a scheme that addresses the expected design of a DICOM header for all possible medical images is a challenge. And then you take it to the next level. Let's say you have identified all of the tags that need to be addressed. How do you address them? Because the DICOM standard doesn't just allow you to, let's say, delete all the values or put in the word anonymized in every single tag. That could violate the DICOM standard for a given tag, and it could make the object unreadable in certain viewers and things. And so I see a lot of this where sometimes we work with organizations that either think they can de-identify it themselves, or they work with some other partner that de-identifies it for them, and then we get it to review. And we see a lot of mistakes like that. A lot of values that are past the character limit, or just obvious violations of the standard that cause a lot of problems. And so we do a lot of cleanup and things. But, I hear it from the other AI developers when they get data from various sources that, it's really messy, and they do have trouble with trying to process some of it, or maybe they'll, be concerned that it's not de-identified properly. And so, yeah, it's a major challenge with the metadata side of things. And another thing that people sort of look over are these UIDs. DICOM has this concept of study instance UID, series instance UID, SOP instance UID, and you have to maintain the hierarchical relationship. If you take, let's say, a CT study that has 10 series, and you start changing the study instance UID to some unique value for every object or something, the whole study is going to be completely messed up, right? So there are techniques that go beyond just basic mappings and things that need to be utilized if you think you're going to de-identify the data properly. And it also kind of goes beyond just let's determine which data elements are blatant PHI versus things that we want to keep private. I mean, the UID is something, in my opinion, is a unique identifier, which if you're trying to achieve de-identification under HHS rules, it needs to be addressed. But it is sort of a gray area in that the element itself is not blatant patient information like their name or their phone number or something.
But it's a cookie crumble that could lead you back to where it came from.
Absolutely. If you have that unique identifier and you have other information such as the source packs, you could identify that case and re-identify the patient. So when you're doing things like we do, which is to prepare a de-identified set for commercial purposes, you want to address every data element that needs to be kept private, which could exceed the bare minimum of PHI data elements. And that's just a best practice that we use to take the best care of the imaging facility partners that we have on board.
So I'm curious, as far as de-identification, what about re-identification, where we're going to try to trace that back to the source. Are you involved in that, and does that come up from time to time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Re-identification has its place in certain imaging workflows. And I guess it starts with what you're doing for de-identification and how is that happening. So, at the DID level, we talked a lot about metadata. There's also the pixel side of it that we didn't really go into much detail, but that's another bear of a challenge that unless you're deep into it, you might not fully understand. So most of us understand like ultrasound images that have patient information at the top or the bottom in a certain bar that many have addressed by coming up with coordinates that they want to black out, and they just apply that redaction to the entire image. But it's not always that easy. You can have burned in PHI in places you might not expect. And it's very common in virtually almost every modality. I think I hear a lot of things about how, well, we're just talking about x-rays here. We're not talking about ultrasound, so I wouldn't expect much PHI. But our findings have been, about 1 in every 10 to 20 x-rays are going to have some kind of burned in PHI in there, in the corners or...
That's an interesting stat.
Yeah, happens much more frequently than you would think. And then take something like a CT. Most of us that know about CT have seen images at the end of the series or the end of the study that are like a dose report or a screenshot from the modality that has certain statistics and has patient information. From what we've seen, a lot of times those types of objects are disguised as CT objects. They're not in there separately as secondary captures or OT objects. They're in there as just another image as part of the CT series. And unless you're on top of it, you're going to miss those. And so it only takes one image with the PHI on it to consider that a breach of the patient. And you have to follow the breach reporting procedures there. So there's a lot to be considered when you talk about the de-identification of the image, and then in order to re-identify it, assuming you're trying to implement a workflow where you need to be able to re-identify it, you have to reverse the things that you're doing. Now, at the metadata level, the technique that's pretty much industry standard is you want to take the original values from the tags that you're de-identifying and put them somewhere else in the header, but put them in an encrypted way. So without getting into too much detail, you can imagine you got the patient name and the date of birth and other elements encrypted and then put into a certain, let's say, private tag. And then those DICOM tags, such as patient name and date of birth, are populated with some de-identified values when it goes out. So maybe the recipient isn't supposed to have the PHI, so they have no way of deciphering the encrypted PHI that's in the header, and all they see is the de-identified data in the tags. And then when it comes back, maybe you have the key to decrypt the encrypted values that are in that private tag, and maybe you have a script that'll replace the values that that were de-identified, and you put the original ones back in. And that's a great way to re-identify at the metadata level. At the pixel level, it can be much harder because typically with the pixel level redactions that you're doing, they're irreversible. You don't want the recipient to be able to take the box away, I mean, that defeats the purpose, right, of the pixel level de-identification. So unless you're using some sort of text redaction tool that can place the text that was on the pixels somewhere and then put it back on to the image, you typically don't see a lot of re-identification of PHI at the pixel level. It's more of a permanent de-identification that can never be reversed. Some of you may be wondering, well, why would we ever want to use re-identification? And one use case that's pretty common out there is if you have some sort of vendor, maybe an AI solution in the cloud, and you want to send a study over to them for inference, you don't want the AI vendor to have the PHI. And so one might ask, well, why can't they have the PHI? We work with other vendors, like our PACS vendor, and we have a BAA with them, and we can send our data to the cloud, to the PACS we have in the cloud, and we don't have to de-identify every study we send up to the cloud. So why should we have to de-identify these cases that go up for AI inference? And the answer to that could be, well, what is that AI vendor doing with the data that you're sending to them? Are they only using it for inference? Or are they making a copy of that data and using that copy for other things, such as further model development or things of that nature? Can we trust that the AI vendor won't make a copy of the data once we ship it up into the cloud, even though we have the contracts in place? Is this a vendor that we can fully trust, or would we feel more comfortable de-identifying the data as it goes up there? And so these are all questions you have to ask.
And just one thing to add is for the non-US listeners, BAA, so that's Business Associate Agreement, I believe,
right?
And that's part of HIPAA. So if you're in Canada or any other country, you would have a data sharing agreement or some sort of partnership agreement with your vendor. And as outlined by Luke, you're not going to necessarily want to have all that revealed to open across the cloud and all the other potential vendors. And I guess one other point is a term that where you may hear pseudo-anonymization. So that workflow that Luke was talking about, we've kind of pseudo-anonymized it. There's an ability to go back and identify it in an encrypted fashion. But is that something that comes up often, or is it more about training the models and we don't really care about looking back and identifying the source of, for whatever reason that one might be?
Right. So the use case where you do want to re-identify is that workflow I was getting to, where you're gonna de-identify the study going up to the cloud, maybe for inference purposes from AI, but then when the output comes back, and the output might be just a secondary capture image or a DICOM SR or something like that, and you need to match that output up with the original source patient, right? And so that's where the re-identification can be necessary for certain use cases. And so it's definitely something that we see and we can help implement if that's a need you have. But when it comes to training models, in my expertise, you don't want PHI going into the model. I mean, it's not that far-fetched to imagine that if you train a model on, let's say, ultrasound data that's not been de-identified, to later on be able to generate something for that model to spit out the patient information that was put into it, Like if you prompted that model and said, generate me an ultrasound image with patient information on it, and all it's been trained on is real patient information, it may be able to generate something that you thought was private. And so while it's not likely, when you train a model, that anybody would be able to pull out an image that the model has been trained on, that's not really how it works. When it comes to prompting these models and having them generate off of the data that they've learned from, it's not that far-fetched to think that the models could remember the patient information and be able to regenerate it.
Mm-hmm. I guess what you're outlining, these arduous processes of trying to anonymize the images, I'm curious, does HL7 play a role in what you do, or is it primarily on the imaging side?
We use HL7 different ways. What we typically deal with is the DICOM imaging. There are times we need to attain radiology report data, and sometimes the easiest way to extract radiology report data is to have the source system push HL7 or U messages, or maybe you're going to have some kind of fire call. But we don't deal with HL7 as much as DICOM for this type of curation and then the model training and things of that nature.
And I guess so. Any PACS admin or anyone that's setting up environments would be familiar at some maybe minimal extent to how hard of a process this is to go through and modify all of the records so that they're anonymous or they've been completely de-identified. And when you're doing this at scale, what types of tools are you looking at? Are these commercial tools? Are they homegrown, or are they open source?
Yeah. So Vega, we're not a software development company. We've always used commercially available tools, and it's allowed us to take a look at the market. We're always on the lookout for something better than what we have now, and we have, over the years, improved our tools. There are organizations out there that develop their own tools, and more power to those organizations. But there are some really nice commercially available tools, and our Vega Tech division actually commercializes some of the same tools that we even use in-house, which gives us a bit of an edge in the sales process because we can really describe how these tools can be used successfully, and we can help the buyers implement them properly and be trained on them properly. But there are a number of tools to consider. So as we've talked about, you have to address the PHI at the metadata level and the pixel level. And from what I've seen, no one tool is going to do all that perfectly. There are best of breed solutions for the metadata side and best of breed solutions for the pixel side. And then another very important component to doing this at scale are validation tools. So you can't assume that the tools that you utilize are going to be perfect, or the schemes you put in place are going to address everything. And so you need validation tools. And you have to validate at the metadata and the pixel level. So here at Vega, we use certain tools that go back and extract metadata elements and then allow us to validate the de-identified metadata elements to make sure that nothing slipped through. And then there's pixel level validation, where, in my opinion, some sort of hybrid approach is often the best, where you try to automate it as much as possible. There are tools that can that can parse the image for any text and then determine if that text is PHI. But there's also often a need for human eyes to be put on every image and review them. So you need a platform for all of this, and you can't put the cart before the horse and start de-identifying without having your platform ready to go and having the whole process from end to end figured out before you get into it. So if there are those that are out there that are unsure of themselves or, looking for guidance, Vega is always here for those organizations that are just looking to optimize their processes for this the best as possible.
Well, awesome. We're at the 30-minute mark, so I like to keep these conversations around this time frame. So maybe what we could do is I'd give you an opportunity. Where are you going to be at any conferences? Where should people look you up if they want to check things out?
Yeah, so first and foremost, just check out our website, vegainformatics.com. There you can learn about all the different divisions we have and learn about how to get a hold of us. We are always at RSNA, and so you can look for our exhibit in RSNA 2025 once we get closer to that conference. And then we will be at SIM and probably some other conferences that have yet to be announced throughout the year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Portland. Sim 25 should be fun. So I will see you there.
Definitely not one you want to miss.
Be the dream machine. DICOM HL7 IHE in the stack.
Okay, well, thanks
We're
very much,
building
Luke.
the
I appreciate
future.
that.
Never looking back.